Ah, I was afraid of this. I fucked up. I fucked up. Oh no. No. Oh god. Oh god. Oh god. Okay. 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 Hey dudes. Today, instead of talking about a specific set, I'm going to be talking about old promo cards. We'll get into the specifics of each card when we get there, but the most popular one is Mana Crypt, which was originally mailed to you if you bought a specific book and mailed in a coupon. So basically, we'll be going over some pretty rare cards that most people might not have even heard of. Because these cards aren't from a specific set, I'm not going to talk about how good they are compared to a specific set, since that doesn't make any sense. But I will still talk about how good they could be if you consider the environment around them at the time of release. And at least in Mana Crypt's case, I'll probably mention that it's pretty fucking busted. Now, I'm not going over every promo card that's ever been printed, just the ones printed before Chandelar released. And I'll also talk about the Chandelar exclusive cards as well, even the ones that weren't ever printed in paper. But yeah, as this isn't an actual set and these cards were all distributed in different ways, there really isn't much else to say. So without further ado, let's talk about the first ever promo card and the little bit of controversy that came with it. It's 1994, and you're in Atlanta, Georgia, going to Dragon Con. And because of that, you got your hands on a Nalathni Dragon. Nalathni Dragon was distributed at Dragon Con and caused an uproar within the Magic community, which is strange because nothing upsets the antisocial nerds that play Magic, but this time they did get upset, and it was because this super good card was mechanically unique. And the only way to get one until Mystery Boosters 2 reprinted this card was by actually physically being at DragonCon in 1994. Anyway, Wizards of the Coast promised not to do mechanically unique promos after that, and they've more or less stuck to that promise. Maybe. I don't know. But let's talk about the actual card that caused such an uproar. Nalathni, Nalath- Nalathni Dragon is a 1/1 dragon that costs 2 and 2 red mana. It has flying and banding and a form of fire breathing. You can pay a red mana to increase its power by 1, but if you use this ability 4 or more times, then Nalathni Dragon is destroyed at end of turn. Okay, so at first glance, this card sucks. And it kind of does. But it was a different time back in the day. Remember, or find out for the first time, that Dragon Whelp was used in early renditions of slide decks, which is just a red aggro deck that popularized the idea of a mana curve. Fun facts aside, this card is probably worse than Dragon Whelp as it trades a power and 2 toughness for banding, but there are definitely conversations that could be had about which one is stronger. None of that really matters though, and I'm really only mentioning it to paint the picture that this card doesn't suck as bad as it seems, and while I don't know if uproars about a card game are ever really justified, there is some validity to the complaints made against Wizards for them handing out a mechanically unique card that is pretty good to convention goers and only them. This card is pretty interesting in a few different ways, though. It got a reprint in Mystery Boosters 2, which I mentioned, which is kind of fascinating in its own right, and it caused an uproar, and despite being pretty rare because it was only distributed at one convention, it isn't really worth shit. Now, granted, I haven't looked up to see if it was worth more before the reprint, and that's probably on screen now, but I doubt it. Maybe I'm an idiot. We'll find out. The other unique thing about it is that it was illustrated by a Michael Whelan, and I don't know anything about this person because it's the only Magic card they've ever illustrated. After a quick Google search, it looks like he's pretty talented, highly acclaimed, and has done a lot of sci-fi book covers, I guess. I don't know, but it's interesting that he did exactly one magic card, and it was a card for a convention that caused an uproar, and the card also does kind of suck. That's really all there is to say about this, I guess. I could go into how useful the banding is, but as it's on a 4 mana 1/1, I don't really think it's that useful. It is a cool card, though. Not too long after this, Harper Prism, a publishing company, started releasing Magic the Gathering books. The first 5 of these books released that were not an anthology also came with promotional Magic cards. Well, they came with a mail order coupon that you had to mail in, and then they'd mail you a card. The first book was called Arena, and you could get either Arena or Sewers of Estark. Or maybe you got both. I wasn't around at the time, and the internet isn't super specific on this point, so I don't know if you got a random one or if you got both. Either way, the next book was Whispering Woods, and you could mail in your coupon to get a Windseeker Centaur. Shattered Chains got you a giant badger, and Final Sacrifice got you a measly, dumb artifact called Mana Crypt. That one's not too big of a deal. The last book of this promotion was The Cursed Land, and you got a random card from the 5 promotional cards that weren't named Mana Crypt because that one was, for some reason, way more popular than the rest. Anyway, let's dive into the Harper Prism cards. First, we have Arena. Arena was available from the book Arena, as I mentioned, and that's awesome because that's really easy to remember. This is a land, and in fact, I think it's the only land we'll talk about today, which is kind of neat. So, this land doesn't tap for mana, but you can pay 3 mana to tap target creature you control, and an opponent also picks a creature to tap, and those creatures deal their damage to each other or fight, as the keyword goes. So this is basically just pay 3, tap this otherwise useless land, and tap a creature that can beat up any of your opponent's creatures, and then you beat up that creature and it gets removed. So with proper setup, this is pay 3, tap a creature to destroy a creature of your opponent's choice. That's not very good. It's certainly not the worst card of all time, and it's pretty fun in like kitchen table or jank commander settings, but this card is by no means optimal. Paying 3 mana for the effect is pretty brutal as well. This card wouldn't be that good if it costs 0 mana to tap it, and it's also kind of upsetting that this card doesn't tap for mana. Still, it's not the worst card we'll talk about today. Maybe. It's not good, though. It was illustrated by Rob Alexander, and this piece is okay, but it's far from my favorite Rob Alexander piece. Oh yeah, it was also reprinted in both Time Spiral and Mystery Booster 2, where they reprinted a lot of random promo cards and other such nonsense. Giant Badger is the next card we're talking about today. Giant Badger was available if you purchased Shattered Chains, which was the 3rd Magic the Gathering novel released by Harper Prism. Giant Badger is a 2/2 that costs 1 and 2 green mana, and if Giant Badger blocks, it gains +2/+2, making it a 4/4 for 3 mana when it's blocking. That's not the worst card in the world, honestly. I hesitate to call it good, but within the context of the time period, I would not be surprised to hear that Giant Badger helped you win games back in the day. It's obviously no Mana Crypt, but if you're playing pretty slow, fair Magic, this card is pretty damn good. It was also reprinted in 8th edition, which is pretty insane. This is the only card we'll talk about today that ever got reprinted in a core set. That's pretty neat. Anyway, Giant Badger is pretty okay. It was illustrated by Liz Danforth, and the art is pretty hilarious. I really like it. But let's move on to Mana Crypt. Mana Crypt is next. This card was originally available from the book Final Sacrifice, which was the 4th book in the series. Oh, what to say about Mana Crypt. It's pretty powerful, obviously, as it costs 0 mana and taps for 2 colorless mana, which is honestly pretty fucking insane. It does have the potentially dangerous downside of dealing 3 damage to you every time you fail a coin flip, so it, on average, every other turn it lightning bolts you. It's still pretty much always worth it to play this card. It's really good. It's been banned in practically everything that isn't Vintage or Canadian Highlander. And for the longest time, you could play it in Commander. But then the previous rules committee decided to ban it, much to the chagrin of many Magic the Gathering players, and a bunch of people pissed and shit all over Twitter about it, and then the rules committee got death threats, and someone filed a complaint with the SEC, I think, for insider trading or something. I don't know, dudes. Nerds are fucking weird about some shit. Anyway, there was a whole trash can fire about it, and the rules committee decided hurting these cats wasn't worth it anymore, so the format's ban list was handed to Wizards, and now the largest community-run format is a Wizards-run format, mostly because of Mana Crypt and, to a lesser degree, Jeweled Lotus. So yeah, a lot of baggage around this card that doesn't really have anything to do with the card itself, but it is a really good card, and it's also a pretty sweet card. I like it. Interestingly, it's the most reprinted card we'll talk about today. They have printed this card a whole bunch, but it's never once been standard legal. The art was done by Mark Teeden, and the art is iconic as hell. It's not my favorite Teeden piece by any means, but it's pretty close to as classic as it gets. It's very cool art. But that's really all I have to say on Mana Crypt. It's just super fucking good, but you don't really need me to tell you that, right? So let's talk about Sewers of Estark, which might be the worst card we're talking about today. Sewers of Estark is an instant that costs 2 and 2 black mana. If target creature is attacking, it cannot be blocked until end of turn. Play before defense is chosen. If target creature is blocking, it and all creatures it blocks do no damage during combat. So this is like a personal fog for one creature, and it costs 4 fucking mana. I don't know why they made this card cost so fucking much. Fog is an elf for a single mana. There would be some rationalization you could make to play this card if it cost like 2 mana. It still wouldn't be good and would not like see any competitive play, but you wouldn't look like the biggest moron in the world for attempting to use it, at least. It's a crazy bad card, which is a shame. It's never been reprinted either, because why would it be? Nobody wants this piece of shit. It's still cheaper than shit. It was illustrated by Melissa A. Benson, and the artwork is pretty damn sweet, honestly. Which is kind of more of a shame because of how bad the card sucks. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this, but Sewers of Estark also came out with the first book, Arena. Anyway, there's not much to say about it, it's a bad fog, so let's move on to the last Harper Prism promo card, which is Windseeker Centaur, which is a 2/2 for 1 and 2 red mana, and it has Vigilance, so it doesn't tap when you declare an attack. That's not bad, at least for the time. Like, it's not good enough to see play in anything today, and it certainly wouldn't, be a competitive runner-up at the time, but it's certainly not the worst creature in the world. I think it is probably less useful than Giant Badger, at least in the metas where you could excuse playing this. But 2/2 for 3 with a benefit is pretty on rate for the time, and even ahead of some creatures. It's probably one of the weaker 2/2s for 3 mana at the time, at least the ones that aren't vanilla creatures, but it's not insultingly bad or anything like that. This was illustrated by Anson Maddox, and it's fine. I don't really have an opinion on this one. With that said, it's probably for the best that most of these promo cards were not really the best thing you could be doing, since the availability of these cards was pretty low. Mana Crypt being a huge outlier with the Harper cards, and I assume it was just an accidental miss. The game was in its infancy back then, and if you look at the card pool at the time, it kind of just reads like a slightly worse Sol Ring, which was a legal uncommon at the time and not terribly difficult to get a hold of. But let's move on. So the next set of cards I want to talk about are from MicroProse Chandalar. These cards were created for Chandalar, and because it was a computer game, they got a little wacky with the effects. Mostly this boils down to them having some level of randomization to the effect, since a computer can do the randomization for you. These cards are not real cards in the sense that there are no physical printings of them, but I do think some of them could be translated into paper fairly easily, and I'll mention that when we talk about those specific cards. But we might as well start with one of the only of these cards that actually was printed. Aswan Jaguar has an actual printing that I assume came with the game, but I couldn't find any information on it, so I'm not certain. It doesn't really matter because it's an oversized card with a non-standard back, so it's not legal and it wouldn't even fit in your deck. But a physical printing of it does exist, which is kind of neat. Aswan Jaguar is a 2/2 that costs 1 and 2 green mana, and when it comes into play, you choose a random creature type out of the creature types in your opponent's deck. Then you can pay 2 green mana and tap Aswan Jaguar to bury target creature of the chosen type. That's kind of neat, but it's also pretty obvious why this wouldn't work so well in paper, at least not without some tweaking. It's also really interesting that the Oracle text from this card has not been updated in forever because it still says bury here on the Oracle text. I mean, that makes sense that this hasn't been updated because there's like no reason to update it. It's not a real card you can actually play with. It's never been reprinted and never will be. But I do think that's wild. I've never seen an obsolete keyword like bury in the text on Scryfall, so that was a fun moment for me personally. But let's talk about the card. In the context of Chandelar, this card is not very good, since most decks don't have any creature type synergies, and will pretty much always have as many creature types as they have unique creatures. If the stars align, this can be pretty decent, but the metal of single player Chandelar doesn't lend itself well to this card being incredibly impactful. If this card just said something like name a creature type and then the effect was tap to destroy a creature of that type, it would be okay at the time if printed in paper, but it still wouldn't be, super great. It is interesting, but it's not great. Anyway, the art was done by Pat Lewis, and the art is really cool on this card. I like it a lot. I don't have much else to say about it though, so let's move on to the rest of the Chandelar exclusive cards, the ones that don't have a promotional printing. And if you look on Scryfall, the images for the Astral cards, which is the set name for the Chandelar exclusive cards, you'll see that the image is pixelated, to say the least. So I used a set editor and cleaned up the images as best I could so that we could have a cleaner look at these cards. I screen capped the card images off of the game itself and put these together to make it a little bit less bad to look at. I will show each of the Scryfall images first, and then the altered image will be up for most of the discussion. Next, we have Call from the Grave, which is a sorcery that costs 2 and a black mana. You put a random creature from a random graveyard into play under your control. Then, Call from the Grave deals damage to you equal to the casting cost of the creature. And now I'm going to backpedal on something I said a little earlier. So, Aswan Jaguar might have an actual printing that exists, but Call from the Grave has an actual printing that exists that is also the size of a standard magic card with the official magic back. It's a playtest card, though, so it isn't legal in actual play, but it is the only card of the MicroProse cards that you can actually shuffle up into a deck. It was printed in Mystery Boosters 2, which is a running theme here, and it actually has some rulings, which is neat. I was wondering when I read this card what happens if a graveyard doesn't have a creature in it. Well, it turns out it can only randomly select a graveyard with at least one creature in it. So there are some, admittedly inconsistent ways of gaming this card a little bit, which is pretty neat. This card is actually fairly playable, but it is still like the 6th best graveyard grabbing card, so there really isn't a time and a place where you would actually play it. But to be fair, it did come out before Reanimate, so your only other options at the time would have been Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, Soul Exchange, or Necromancy. So I guess it's the 5th best at the time. At least in this hypothetical world where the card was actually printed and you could play it. That's not how it shaked out, though. It didn't come out till Mystery Booster 2, so now it's competing with everything, making it even worse. But yeah, I don't know. I guess there's nothing else to say here, or none of this matters, right? But the card itself is still pretty cool. The art was done by Quentin Hoover, and it's pretty fucked up. Like, not necessarily in a bad way, it's just kind of messed up. I don't know what kind of drugs Quentin was doing before he painted this, but he probably had a great time. It is a cool card. Either way, next we have Faerie Dragon, which is a 1/3 dragon that costs 2 and 2 green mana. It has flying, and you can pay 1 and 2 green mana to play a random effect. What the fuck does that mean? So, this one is really hilarious and honestly a pretty bad card, but this is a great example of why these cards are digital only, since this is incredibly asinine. I don't have the full complete list of everything this card can do, but it could basically trigger any trigger event programmed into the game. So you could get an Ancestral Recall trigger, a Lightning Bolt trigger, a Hive activation, a Disrupting Scepter trigger, Fog, a Berserk effect, a Bloodlust effect, an effect that lets you tap or untap any permanent, and more wacky effects that might help your position or might hurt your position or maybe just do something that doesn't matter at all. This is a really hilarious card that's fun to fuck around with in Chandelar when you're bored, but even if you could play this in a competitive environment, you wouldn't, because consistency is king, and this is literally the opposite of that. There really isn't anything else to say about this card, but it is funny. The art was illustrated by Nene Thomas, and it's pretty sweet, at least what little you can make out from it. These MicroProse images are very low fidelity, which is a shame, and I could not find the original art for most of these. I did find this one though. Spoiler alert, that's coming up soon. Uh, Still, this is a fun card. Ah, shit. This is the part where I have to tell you that I lied to you. Like, again. I said Arena was the only land we'd talking about, but I forgot that Gem Bazaar exists. This is a card I think they could actually print into Magic with no problems. It wouldn't be that good, but it also wouldn't be terrible, and it would be kind of interesting. Gem Bazaar is a 5-color land that chooses a random color when it comes into play, and each time it's tapped, it chooses a random color that it can be tapped for. This is pretty easy to do with standard 6-sided dice, 1 for white, all the way down to 5 for green, and a reroll on 6. Boom, card's done. I'm kind of bummed that this card never got made, as I think it's pretty cool and interesting. It's not particularly strong, though, and in most formats, you'd have way better options for 5-color lands if that's what you were trying to do. I do think it would be like fun in Commander or Kitchen Table, though. The art was done by Liz Danforth, and it's pretty cool. Again, it's disappointing how low res these images are, but it is what it is. Then we have Goblin Polka Band, which is not the most hilarious Goblin card of all time, but it is really close. For 2 red mana, you get a 1/1 Goblin that has a tap ability. You can pay 2 generic mana and tap Goblin Polka Band, and then pay a red mana per target to target X random creatures, where X is the amount of red mana you used, not including the 2 generic you had to pay to tap the ability. These random creatures are tapped, and if those creatures are goblins, they do not untap during their controller's next untap step. This is really hilarious for a few different reasons, but one of the funniest reasons is that it can randomly target itself, and since it's a goblin, if it does target itself, it takes itself out of the game for an extra turn, which is funny. Beyond that, this card is not good. Tapping down creatures can be an incredibly brutal and effective method of punching through for a win, especially in a meta like Chandelar, where it's mostly just playing creatures and bad decks. But you're just as likely to tap your own creatures down as you are your opponents. Depending on course on the number of creatures you both control, right? Like if they have a bunch of creatures and you have fewer, obviously odds are you'll hit theirs, but you get what I mean. You also can't really afford to use this in a goblin deck, which is a shame because if you do get hit with it, it just kind of super fucks you, right? It's a funny card, and it's flavorful, and I love it, but it's not good. Still, I don't think being good is really the purpose of these random cards. They kind of are just a bit of fun to, mess with the game system and to, make use of the computer that they are running on. They're more of a laugh than anything else, right? And I think they did a pretty good job with that. This was illustrated by Quentin Hoover, and it's pretty fantastic and hilarious, and also the only original art I could find. Or other people could find. I just looked on a website after other people did the legwork. Magic libraries. Anyway, moving on. Then we have Necropolis of Azar, an enchantment that costs 2 and 2 black mana. Whenever a non-black creature is put into any graveyard from play, put a husk counter on Necropolis of Azar. You can pay 5 and remove a husk counter to put a Spawn of Azar token into play. This token is a black creature with Swamp Walk that has a random power and toughness no less than 1 and no greater than 3. Does that make sense? It's kind of an interesting card, and it's on the cusp of being decent, because if you always get a 3/3 Swamp Walking creature out of it, it's not too bad. But a 1/1 Swamp Walker for 5 mana is obviously kind of a shit rate. This is basically slightly better than the Hive, which is still a really shit card. Well, honestly, it's not even slightly better, because non-black creatures have to die for you to use this, which makes this a bigger pain in the ass than the Hive, which is already a pain in the ass and never does anything. At least the random part of the card is manageable, but it also kind of takes away the fun, making this less usable because it's not even super hilarious, right? Like, it's just almost good, and the randomization is pretty much playable, but the card still sucks. I don't know. It's decent. It's fine. Assuming your opponent isn't playing mono black. If they are and you're mono black, then you're kind of fucked. But I guess if you were going to try to make this work, you would play mostly non-black creatures so that you could do this. I guess you could do some things with it, but I don't think it's ever worth it to put in the effort. Anyway, let's move on. Next we have Orcish Catapult, which is an instant that costs X and 2 red mana. Randomly distribute X -0/-1 counters among a random number of random target creatures. Okay, this one kind of makes my head hurt. You can't have 3 random variables on a card without my brain imploding. So if you pay 5 into X, you will have 5 -0/-1 counters. If there are 5 creatures in play, these counters will be placed on anywhere from 1 to 5 of the creatures that are randomly selected. So this is pretty funny, but also completely bad from a trying to win the game standpoint, since they could all blow up your board for no reason. There isn't much else to say about the card. It's funny, but it's bad, and other than, I guess, playing it with a Shroud creature, which doesn't even exist in the Chandelar meta, there really isn't a way to game this card other than playing a creatureless deck, I suppose, but yeah, I guess you could do that. It's still not worth it. It was illustrated by Melissa A. Oh, come on, dude. It was illustrated by Melissa A. Benson, and it's far from her best work, but it's pretty cool. Next, we have Pandora's Box, an artifact that costs 5 mana. You can pay 3 mana and tap Pandora's Box to choose a random creature card from each player's library. For each player, flip a coin. If that flip ends up heads, put a token creature into play and treat it as an exact copy of the selected creature. So this is kind of neat. It's not good because your opponent might get a better creature than you, and even if you both get a creature of equal value, it costs you 3 mana and a card, and it costs your opponent nothing. It would be pretty funny against a creatureless deck, but since the only place you're likely ever to play this card is in a single-player game of Chandelar, a meta which has pretty sure no creatureless decks, at least as far as I'm aware, that's a corner case that's not super likely to ever come up. I don't really have much else to say about the card. It's interesting, but it sucks. The art was done by Amy Weber, and I really like it. I guess you could, like, build a deck with, like, one or two large creatures and then just use this to cheat those out. But the issue with that is, like, the large creatures kind of really suck back then, right? Like, what do you do? A Colossus of Sardia, you put it out and then you have to pay 9 to untap it. Or, like, a Leviathan, which I think is the one that makes you, like, sacrifice islands. So, like, there really isn't a good use case for it. And it's not even that cheap, right? Like, the game's already slightly developed by the time this comes down. It's really not good, but I guess you could do some funny things with it. Anyway, let's move on to Power Struggle, which is an enchantment that costs 2 and 3 blue mana for a total of 5 mana. During each player's upkeep, that player exchanges control of random target artifact, creature, or land they control for control of random target permanent of the same type that a random opponent controls. It's interesting that they bothered to say random opponent controls because unless I've missed a major feature of Chandelar, there is no way to play against more than one opponent, so that randomization will literally never come up. It's not super important, but it is interesting. This really isn't that good, but it is random, so it could potentially work out great in your favor, or not great. But I suppose if you were trying to make this work, you'd just play garbage cards, but there are two main problems with that. First off, the decks that the computer opponents use in Chandelar are also pretty bad and usually filled with some really shit cards. And two, you would just be filling your deck with bad cards on the gamble that you could exchange those bad cards for your opponent's, hopefully, less bad cards. You could also end up in a situation where you just keep looping the same cards back and forth, which is pretty funny, but not really likely to improve your chances of winning. It's a hilarious card, but it's pretty shit. I guess you could do some stuff with it, like if you only have a Leviathan on the field that's tapped and you're playing against someone who's playing islands, you could force them to sack their lands. Or, like, well, it wouldn't even force. I don't know. It's not good. let's just move on. Prismatic Dragon is next on the list, and it's a 2/3 dragon that costs 2 and 2 white mana. It has flying, and during your upkeep, Prismatic Dragon becomes a random color permanently. Unless you pay 2, then it becomes another random color permanently. Potentially the same random color that it already was, because I'm pretty sure it can do that. Finally, a consistent counter to Red Elemental Blast and other such hate cards. I'm picking on this card, but there might actually be some funny stuff you can do with this card. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, and I really doubt you can do anything that makes this busted. But maybe you can do something. I don't know. I like the idea of this card, but I just really don't see the vision here. It's interesting, at least. Oh well, it was illustrated by Amy Weber, and I really like the art on this one. It's neat. The those kind of suck though. I mean the card kind of sucks, not the art. The art is really good. I enjoy this piece a lot. Uh, but yeah, then we have Rainbow Knights, a 2/1 creature that costs 2 white mana. When Rainbow Knights comes into play, it gains protection from a random color permanently. And then you can pay 1 to give it first strike until end of turn, or you can pay 2 white mana to give it either +0/+0, +1/+0, or +2/+0 until end of turn. But that is chosen at random. So this one isn't too bad, honestly. It's basically just a reskinned version of Order of Leaper, which is not a bad card, at least at the time. The random color protection could be incredibly useful or incredibly not useful, and the pump ability has an expected value that's probably pretty close to what Order of Leaper would get you. But you could get insanely lucky or insanely fucked. And as I've said 1,000 times, consistency is key in games like Magic, and this is not consistent. So it's definitely worse than something like Order a Leaper, but I do think this is the only card we've talked about that's exclusive to Chandelure that I would actually consider playing when I was trying to win, depending on what other cards were available, of course. The fact that the first strike ability requires generic mana instead of white is actually pretty cool, but as a 2 white pip 2 drop with a 2 white pip activated ability, you'd still want to play this in mostly, if not fully, a monocolored deck. Yeah, it's pretty okay, and downright great by the standards of the Chandelure cards we've seen. It was illustrated by Douglas Schuler, and the art is pretty great. I like this one. It's very, very classic Douglas Schuler. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Banalashiro, and I'm sure that's what he was going for. That's almost it for the MicroProse cards. We only have one last one to talk about, and this one is a banger. Whimsy is a sorcery that costs X and 2 blue mana. When it's cast, it activates X random fast effects. I'm pretty certain this uses the same list as Faerie Dragon, but I could be wrong on that. This card does specify fast effects, whereas Faerie Dragon says random effect, so there might be some effects that Faerie Dragon can do that Whimsy can't, but I don't think it really matters. This is a card you only play when you're bored and fucking around because this thing is about as inconsistent as it's possible to get. I've played this card like 3 times and had it cast against me a couple of times, and it has in no way ever done anything that was remotely useful in any way whatsoever. Uh, it is a really fucking funny card though, but it is as terrible as it is funny. Um, yeah. The art was done by Anson Maddox, and it's pretty solid. I like the art. The Chandelure cards actually have pretty good art, honestly, all things considered. Although most of the artists have been banging out magic art for a while at this point, so they're obviously bound to get better at it. That's it for the exclusive Chandelure cards, and these are more fun and funny than they are good, which, as I've said, I'm pretty sure was the idea behind them. I think they were just making something to fuck around with the game engine, since it's the first time Magic could do some of this stuff. I do think Gem Bazaar could have actually been made, and I do think even Rainbow Knight wouldn't be that hard to accommodate in paper, but that's neither here nor there. We are mostly done with the cards I want to talk about today, but there are a few more special cards I'd like to discuss. Everything we've talked about so far has either been a rare or exclusive to a video game, but it's totally possible you've played with all of these cards if you've been in the game long enough and had a computer in the late 90s or yesterday. These last cards, I can almost with 100% certainty say you've never played with or more than likely have never even seen in real life. These cards either have one printing or only a handful of printings, and none of them are legal anywhere. To start with, 1996 World Champion is one of the rarest cards in the game of Magic, with only a single copy existing. It was given to Tom Chamfeng. I think I'm saying that right. Sorry, Tom, if I got that wrong. Anyway, he was, as you can probably guess, the winner of the 1996 World Championship. As there is only one copy, it's obviously not legal to play anywhere, but it is pretty interesting and honestly probably a pretty fucking good card if it were legal. It costs 5 mana and requires one of each color, so it is pretty difficult to cast. But it can't be targeted by spells or effects, so it is almost impossible to deal with once it's cast. Its power and toughness are each equal to target opponent's life total, so it only has to hit once to end the game in 1v1 and only 3 times. Well, as many players as there are is how many times it has to hit, right? That's pretty good. Its activated ability is super interesting because its ability costs 0 and can only be activated while 1996 World Champion is in the library. I'm not sure the legality of an ability like this at the time or now, but that's hardly the point, right? Because it's never intended to be played. This card can be searched out of your deck whenever you want, which is pretty cool, especially since the card itself is more of a trophy than an actual Magic card. But it is standard size and has a legal back, so you could theoretically use it in Kitchen Table or in a Rule Zeroed game, assuming you had a copy of it and did the travesty of breaking it out of its trophy. It's also the first 5-color legendary creatures Wizards ever printed, which is kind of interesting, I guess. Realistically, there is a lot more I could say about this card, and it's really interesting that they made a card like this exactly once and then never did anything like this again. Probably because it was a bit of a pain in the ass and ended up not being worth it. Um, oh yeah, I guess while I'm spitting out fun facts about this card, I should mention that they had the plates and the other copies of the card destroyed because they print in sheets. So they made a plate for this and printed the cards, and then the plates were physically destroyed, so another copy of this card could never be made. The plates were what presses the ink onto the cards, so you can think of them sort of like stamps. Either way, this is one of the 2 rarest cards in Magic history, with the other one being one we'll talk about soon. But not yet, because the next card we're going to talk about has 9 copies, and it isn't even a real card. I'm talking about Proposal. So, Proposal was put together by Dave Howell for Richard so he could use it to propose to Lily Wu. The art was done by Quentin Hoover, who was apparently Lily's favorite artist, which is kind of wild to me. From what I've seen, a lot of people are not a huge Quentin Hoover fan, and he's pretty low on my list. But to each their own, I guess. These cards were just printed out in the office and glued to land cards, so they're basically really shitty counterfeits or lazy proxies. But that hardly matters for the purpose that they served. Richard put one of the copies in a deck, then played Lily and cast it during the game to propose to her, which is pretty sweet, right? Like, that's cute. The other 8 copies went to important family members, and Dave Howell and Quentin Hoover also each got a copy of the card. As you can see, there isn't art pictured here because Richard requested that the art not be shown online due to the intimate nature of the card. Some speculation has been around for years, and Quentin Hoover's copy was apparently stolen in Japan. So there is a version out there, and it's entirely possible the actual art is out there somewhere. I did a little bit of digging, but I wasn't confident any of the art I saw was legit, and I also didn't care that much, which is why I'm not showing you the art here. And also his wishes and everything. This isn't so much a card as it is just a sweet way to propose, and that's really cool. I don't know too much about Richard's personal life, and part of that is just because I don't fucking care. But they did get divorced, and he remarried, and so there is another one of these Richard got married cards out there called Phoenix Heart. But that wasn't a proposal card as far as I know. It is pretty fucking funny though. But we aren't talking about that card. It came out way too late to be relevant to this video. Although I guess I can also briefly mention Splendid Genesis and Fraternal Exaltation, though they did come out a bit later and technically aren't within the confines of the video either. Either way, who gives a shit? Splendid Genesis was to celebrate the birth of Richard's first child, a daughter, and Fraternal Exaltation was created to celebrate the birth of his second child, a son. There were somewhere around 100 copies of Splendid Genesis and 200 copies of Fraternal Exaltation, and both are pretty fucking pricey on the secondary market. Uh, these are technically after the arbitrary cutoff that I personally decided, and it's not like we can talk about how effective they would be because that's stupid. They're not real cards. So we'll just move on to the final card I want to discuss today. Forgive me for fucking up the name of this card, but it's Shichifukujin Dragon. This is the other one of one. As rare as 1996 World Champion, and unless you're in Japan, it's likely you've never heard of this, even if you have heard of 1996 World Champion. This card was created to commemorate the opening of the DCI Japan Tournament Center. Since cards are printed on a sheet, as I've mentioned, each other copy of the card was destroyed along with the plates used to make the card. and the card was put on display with the original art by Christopher Rush at the Tournament Center. The card was apparently moved to Hobby Japan head office when the Tournament Center closed down, whatever that is, but I didn't look too far into that, so we'll just talk about the actual card. It costs 6 and 3 red mana for a mana cost of 9. It is a 0/0, and when it comes into play with 7 +1/+1 counters on it, and you can pay 3 red mana and remove 2 +1/+1 counters on it to put 3 +1/+1 counters on it at the end of turn. This ability can only be played as a sorcery. So this card sucks, but the art is really cool, and the card is pretty thematic. Shichi apparently means 7 in Japanese, and it's based on a luck dragon or something like that. I don't know Japanese culture too well, but I guess it's something they understand and respect. Either way, the card itself is very cool and incredibly rare. Yeah. And Christopher Rush did the art, as I mentioned, did a fantastic job on it. Super cool card. I really like this card a lot. It does suck mechanically, though, but that's hardly here or there, right? It's a ceremony piece, not a card meant to be played with. But yeah, that is, I guess, all I have for you today as far as promo and rare cards go. It's a pretty interesting collection of cards, in my opinion, but honestly, other than maybe Mana Crypt, these cards not being incredibly available isn't really a problem, since most of them suck. Mana Crypt isn't that big of a deal either, because it's only legal in Vintage, it's super whale format, and there's a bunch of printings of it, so it's actually really fucking accessible these days, especially compared to most cards that are really good in Vintage. Anyway, I'm tired of talking, so I'm going to stop doing that. But first, I just need to say thanks for watching. Please like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you give a shit. But either way, I hope you have a magical day.